Chapter 1. A warm welcome to Signia. And stay out, you filthy beggar. Dominic heard the shopkeeper's voice shout as he picked himself up from the dusty roadway. That made the fourth time this week he had been physically thrown out of a noble-run establishment after he had gone in attempting to sell his salvaged goods. Stupid noble shopkeepers. It wasn't like they were the only ones with a claim to this continent. They just had better weapons and more population than the non-human nations did. The only problem he had with that fact was the small matter of him being born a dragonkin, a demi-human species, more commonly known as sorcerers for the power that they wielded. A lineage of innate magic users with a hint of a magical beast's blood in their veins. In his case, it was the blood of a golden dragon, which had given him the horns that had alerted the shopkeeper to his non-human status when his hat slipped to the side. But also, more importantly, his blood had given him the ability to channel mana for spells without using his own internal reserves, an ability that he had never heard of anyone but the dragon princes of his home nation having. However, his homeland had already fallen under the might of the Dago's armies, and he had fled to Signia. Referring to himself as a prince of wavemates was a bit pretentious these days. Today he was flat broke and hungry, far from royalty, even minor royalty, living in a country manor. Giving up on finding a buyer for his goods now wasn't an option. Perhaps one more stealthy trip to the recyclers would turn up something too good to turn down if he could avoid the guards. He was always good with his hands, and plenty of these rich snobs would throw out perfectly good stuff that was only a little damaged. Change out a watch strap or replace a crystal focus, and the items they called junk were as good as new. But none of the dealers in the uptown district would buy from him, and he had been regretting coming to this city from the very moment that he had arrived. A week of continued rejection hadn't helped his mood at all. Even sleeping in the forest was an improvement on this filthy city. But this was where he needed to be. Signia City was the seat of the Signia Royal Military and home to all of the greatest minds in the nation, not to mention the wealthiest ones. Alone, Dominic was no match for the foreign army that had burned his hometown and his entire nation to the ground. Not that he hadn't tried. When the Dago's army had come to raze his nation to the ground, dozens had fallen to the childish magic of an enraged preteen dragonkin sorcerer before the remainder of the raiding party had been forced to flee. But he had been too late to save the people of the village. It was a senseless tragedy, civilians wiped out for territory that nobody actually cared about. That was his home, and Dominic would not forget. He was certain that with sufficient dedication, he could gain enough influence that he could convince the army to claim the lands along their border and pay back every life that the cowards had taken 1,000-fold. Even as he thought it, Dominic knew that it was a childish fancy, completely unrealistic in the real world. But he was still going to try. All he had to do was make it to the royal family's apprentice induction, which should be announced within the month. Well, he also needed a proper apprentice's trade skill stone to prove his worth, then an impressive enough showing that they were convinced to actually hire him. But that was a minor detail. With a position within the royal palace, he would gain the right to propose new ideas for consideration by the army. But more importantly, if they adopted one of his ideas, he could ask for a boon in lieu of financial compensation. Taking control of the lost bit of forest where his home used to be was a small thing for the Signian army. While Dominic wandered the streets of Signia City, he took in the appearances of the people around him. Almost all wore fancy coats and hats. Some were even wearing goggles or gas masks, and steam-driven or magitech vehicles were everywhere on the road, spewing constant streams of steam and smoke into the air. He might have been born in a rural border village, filled with magic and alchemy, but Dominic was certain that he would never belong inside these overdeveloped technomage-built cities. Half of the locals didn't even have the decency to power their steam carriages and trucks with magic like civilized beings. To save money on construction, they used coal or liquid fuel instead. Why would any intelligent species do that when they could just solve their problems with magic? Dominic knew the answer to that, though he didn't want to admit it. Most of the humans didn't have any innate affinity for magic. The best that they could manage was to attune themselves to a magical gem or magitech device to gain access to the magic contained within, and then recharge the item with a mana core, either extracted from a monster's corpse or artificially created. But even with all his complaints about the coal burning, there was abundant magic in the city as well. He could see it in the skill gems worn on jewelry, in the street lamps overhead that looked like gas flames but were burning mana. What is going on with the shopkeepers here? Is there something wrong with their brains? Who refuses to buy quality goods at a discount? He whispered to himself as he stood against the filthy brick wall, looking up at the sky for answers. But there were no answers to his troubles, only more questions. Questions and airships, floating on huge balloons and driven by propellers through the sky. His presence was starting to attract attention. A lone young man standing still while everyone else was rushing to get somewhere. So Dominic adjusted his hat over his short golden horns and pulled his hood back over his head for an extra measure of safety as he joined the flow of foot traffic toward what appeared to be a library. Welcome to the Signia City Conservatory. Do you have a pass, or would you like a day ticket? The valet by the door asked. Dominic hesitated. He didn't have the money for a ticket, no matter how nice the filtered air inside the conservatory was. He hadn't even noticed that he was trembling with hunger until the valet spoke again. Would you like me to call you a doctor? I get a discount rate on call-outs from the conservatory. The young man asked. Dominic shook his head and focused on the world around him. If he was going to find something to eat today, he was going to have to come up with a plan. He quickly read the valet's name from his name tag. My apologies, Mr. Dalton. I should be fine if I can rest for a moment. Is there somewhere to sit here? Yes, young sir. There on your right are the benches for waiting, Dalton replied with a professional smile for the slender youth in front of him. With the hood up and his hat firmly in place, the valet hadn't noticed the horns on his head that marked Dominic as a demi-human. If he had, his attitude would certainly have changed. The sorcerers and their kin had a reputation as troublemakers in the city. They were marked as trouble in general, according to most people. Unlike the techno-witches, the artificers, the mages, and the wizards, all of whom were still humans who could use magic, the sorcerers were part magical beast, and their tempers could be volatile, with a physique to back up their threats. Valet Dalton did his best not to look judgmental as he stared at the stranger. He seemed a bit disoriented, but that could happen if you spent too much time outside in the heat, he heard. Personally, he didn't like to leave the filtered air of the conservatory, and he even paid a premium for an apartment right here within its walls. He was about to extend his hand to assist Dominic, but the boy was already out of reach and moving toward the bench to rest. Dalton couldn't help but notice that, despite the heat, he was still wrapped in the long oilcloth jacket he was wearing. It was battered with years of wear, but quite fashionable, with the brass cogwork on the sleeves and the hood's row of brass rivets. Still, it was far too warm to be wearing it buttoned to the neck on a day like today. Dear World Dragon, where have you led me, and why isn't there food? Dominic muttered as he watched the elaborately dressed people hurry about their day. A tap on his shoulder brought his attention back to the present and the flow of wealthy people around his. Excuse me, sir. The benches are for paying customers only. If you're not going to buy a ticket, you need to scram. An older security guard informed Dominic while giving Dalton an annoyed glare for letting this obvious beggar into the conservatory. My apologies. I will be on my way, Dominic whispered, not wanting to cause a scene in this new city where he didn't know any of the unspoken rules. His long strides took him out of the noble district and down the increasingly crowded streets toward the clanging of steel on steel that he recognized as the sound of a smithy. With luck, he should find some answers there. A blacksmith always knew where to find what you needed. You just had to catch them between projects, as they didn't react well to being interrupted. As he stopped to catch his breath and straighten his clothes out in front of the building, Dominic heard the smith talking to a customer. I will get that to you as quick as I can, but steel and copper are both in short supply these days, so you will have to wait until I've got another shipment in to make it from. A raspy voice that he assumed was the smith was saying, Well, make it quick, or I'll find a smith who can get me what I need. Understand, old man? The deeper voice sounded incredibly frustrated in its retort. Then a few seconds later, a large nobleman in a black leather jacket which had brass and silver decorations all over it and dragged the ground when he walked, stomped out of the building and got into one of the waiting steam carriages. It seemed to have mystic runes all over it, but they weren't in any magical language that Dominic had seen before. He might not know how to read most of them, but he had grown up in a village full of techno-witches, dragonkin, and artificers. So he had at least seen the more common ones. The vehicle gave a whistle as it pulled out into traffic, and Dominic sensed the magic that was fueling the furnace of the oddly decorated contraption. "I don't suppose that you're looking for work, young lad?" The raspy voice of the blacksmith asked from behind him, pulling Dominic's attention from the vehicles on the road. Dominic had always been fascinated by the blacksmith's craft, despite his parents' insistence that such common jobs were not for him. Though, with his home gone, such considerations no longer really held any weight. But so far, he hadn't been able to obtain the trade skill core that was necessary to begin his training for the profession. The trade skill cores were a Magitech item that would attune to their users the first time that they were upgraded, and the ability to create them was limited to master level or higher tradesmen. The trade skill core for blacksmiths was one of the acceptable base cores for an apprentice magical engineer, which Dominic hoped to officially become with the next Signia Royal Apprentice Trial. The other options for the trade would be Archmage and Runemaster, both of which required a much higher level of difficulty to obtain. The old smith continued. "You look capable enough for a dragonkin sorcerer your age. You don't see many of the sorcerer sorts around here, but I would know the scent of dragon magic anywhere. How about we work a deal? You bring me the materials I need, and I will help you level up your trade skills. I'm sure you know a thing or two about making a deal." Dominic laughed despite himself. Yes, who would know better about making a deal than a refugee prince who had been living in the forest? Other than bartering for goods, he didn't recall making a formal deal in his life. But if he had grown up in the city, then shady deals would certainly have been a part of everyday life. Chapter 2. Pops the Smith. Dominic shook his head as he smiled back at the old smith, with his thick white beard tucked under a long leather apron to prevent it from getting singed as he worked. "As much as I would love to take you up on your offer, I'm in a bit of a predicament. You see, I have no idea where I can find you the materials you need, and they shot at me when I tried to scrounge in the city's recycling yard," he explained. "A bit afflicted in the head, are you? I've heard that happens to the magical sorts on occasion. Never fear. Pops will take good care of you. You're in Signia City, the capital of Signia on the eastern shores of the Dragon Continent." Dominic resisted the urge to roll his eyes at the obvious. Pops sounded like he was going to help him out with his short-term needs, and a smith's helper was a job that should pay very well. "What I need are any items made of steel or copper, and I know just where you can get them. There are daily groups headed out to the forest to deal with the goblin infestation in the regions surrounding the city. Now, I wouldn't dream of telling a young lad such as yourself to go alone, but with a group, even a fighter without any skill crystals or enhancement gems should be fine. As a sorcerer, you should have a bit of the magic of your beast's blood, so just blast them if they bother you, and the goblins should be easy work for the soldiers in your group." The burly old blacksmith stopped talking to take a long puff on an ornate silver tobacco pipe while Dominic considered his options. "How many of them would you need to sell me a trade skill core and teach me the basics of the smithy?" he asked. If he was right, and the rules here was similar to the other cities he had been in, then a master smith such as Pops should be allowed to create a trade skill core and teach him the basics through a skill book, a magical item that masters of a craft could create to train their apprentices more rapidly than individual lessons, and attune the trade skill core to the new tradesmen. Displaying the trade skill core would show the world they were a real apprentice smith while they practiced the trade to unlock the accumulated knowledge that the master had sealed within the skill core. "Well, it just so happens that I'm in a bit of a hurry myself, so I will give you a discount. If you can bring me 10 fists of copper before the 7th afternoon bell tolls, then I will teach you the basics of the forge." Dominic looked at the clock on his wall, an intricate brass device with exposed gears and an etched silver face. An item far more ornate than he had expected in this part of town. It read 11:15, so it was not quite noon yet, giving him a little over 7 hours to find and kill a bunch of goblins or find somewhere to obtain a bag full of copper. That wasn't quite how he had imagined passing his afternoon, but it would have to do. With a bit of luck, the goblins might even have some stolen money on them, and he could find a proper room for the night after he found something to eat. "Where do I find one of these groups going to kill goblins?" Dominic reluctantly asked. "They're right here. You see the steam carriages for the hunting group stage at the station out in front of my smithy? Just go ask around if anyone needs a spellcaster, and you'll find a group in no time. The stout old man was in a much better mood now that he had made a deal to get the materials that he needed. There were plenty of adventurers, mercenaries, and soldiers moving through Signia City these days, but everyone took their materials to the uptown district where the majority of the magical devices were made, and the shops could afford to pay a higher price. The trade skill core and apprentice smithing book that he offered the Dragonkin boy were worth 1 silver coin combined, less than 5 of the goblin's daggers, but it would take 15 of them to make 10 fists of copper, as he had requested. He felt a bit bad about taking advantage of the downtrodden Dragonkin, but perhaps he could show him a bit of kindness to make up for his stinginess. Overuse of the magical power that came from greater beings was known to periodically wipe some of a young Demahuman's memories, which is what he assumed had happened to Dominic, who was actually just suffering from heat stroke. But keeping the coat buttoned was the only way to hide the fact that the clothes underneath were little better than rags, completely worn out and in need of mending. So Pops decided that he would offer Dominic the apprentice's bed at the back of his smithy for a few days until he got himself settled in the city. If the boy never did choose another place, then perhaps he would take in a new apprentice. Dominic looked like he would be much better at dealing with customers than Pops was, that was for certain. If nothing else, the snobbish sort should bugger off as soon as they saw him at the counter with his horns showing. But first the boy needed enough strength to actually go hunting goblins. Pops knew just how it felt to go hungry. He hadn't always been a master blacksmith, and the locals hadn't been much more kind to him when he had first returned home to take over the shop as his father got ready to retire. Like Dominic, the dwarven master smith was born with a touch of magic, but without any visible signs of his powers. The locals hadn't forgotten, though, and the combination of jealousy and greed had led to a lot of resistance to him taking over the failing smithy. So, with a smile, he handed the boy a bag of fried pretzels he had purchased that morning and turned him toward the door. Unaware of the full extent of the bad deal that he had made or the actual value of the attuned skill core he had agreed to purchase, Dominic made his way out to the street, where he noticed that there were dozens of people just standing around in tarnished copper-covered alcoves designed to protect them from the direct sun. As he got closer, it was obvious that this was the right place. Group leaders were calling out for members and waving down anyone they thought was promising. Apprentice 3, or Heir spellcasters needed. We've got 2 journeyman paladins. One of the group members called out. Journeyman 8 and up. We're leaving in 3 minutes to go hunt dire wolves in the North Woods. Any skill set is welcome. We have a solid core group. Another called. Hey, you in the long coat. We're short on casters. Want to come with us? A young boy called from Dominic's left after noticing the single magical gem visible on the amulet worn around his neck. It was a skill gem for minor illusion and the only spell gem Dominic owned. But being born of the Dragonkin's now virtually extinct royal lineage, he had an innate ability to use an arcane blast at will, and once a day, he could use Dragon Flame, though it burned his throat every time. Aside from the spell itself, his arcane blast had a secondary effect, to heal himself a bit when it was used to kill. His mother had called it the Dragon's Blessing, but Dominic was a bit dubious about what sort of blessing required killing to work. The boy who had called out to him was a full head shorter than Dominic and couldn't be more than 14 years old, but he had some muscle from training, and his gear looked expensive. Dominic could see the magical crystal in the hilt of his sword, so it was definitely an enchanted blade, and those weren't cheap in any city. Dominic, my name is Dominic, he replied, holding out his hand to shake the other boys. Darley Stuvencrun. Don't worry, I don't mind going hunting with commoners. Hop in the truck bed. We're ready to leave. The boy replied in a somewhat haughty tone. These are my classmates from the Signia Royal Academy, Senior Academy Year 1, Class A. I knew it was a good idea to come to the Commoner Square first. You see, we don't have any real spellcasters in our group, only the paladins and an arcanist. Darlys explained as the vehicle began moving with a whistle and the driver pulled out into traffic. Paladins were warriors who had gotten a skill core from the church to attune them to holy element magical gems and magical devices. It let them use some limited healing powers, but didn't hinder their ability to use skill gems and devices that held combat skills and physical enhancements. The arcanist wasn't a real spellcaster, either. They couldn't cast spells without the magical devices that they carried, and an apprentice arcanist, that young wouldn't be carrying all that much. Most likely the boy they were referring to wasn't even a proper arcanist, but some nobleman's kid who wanted to become one and had obtained a combat-type magical item using his family's wealth. You could only have one base skill core attuned to you at a time. The paladins had theirs, and with luck, Dominic would have a blacksmith's core by the end of the day. The cores, gems, and magical devices all had limitations on which other ones they would interact properly with, and if you tried to use incompatible ones together, you could end up with none of them activating at all. The blacksmith's core was one of the more flexible options, since smiths worked with all sorts of equipment and materials. The only thing Dominic knew that they couldn't do was use holy or unholy items. No casters? Forgive my ignorance, as I'm not local, but how does that happen? He asked. We're from an academic academy, not a combat academy. We are in training to join the royal court as clerks and assistants, as well as finishing our noble family's training to run our households. Those who wanted to pursue the path of the mage or the clerics instead of taking up the responsibilities of a high noble went to the church or the arcane academy, the boy seated on the other side of Dominic explained. The wagon was a mix of both young boys and girls, but all of them appeared to be 13 or 14 years old, and not at all suited to combat. He really should have asked at least a few important questions before they were moving. Going monster hunting with children just seemed like a terrible idea. I take it that this expedition is a school requirement? Dominic asked. A tall blonde girl with an enchanted steel chain mail jacket smirked at him. In a way, yes, but also no. You see, killing goblins gives mana cores, and we can save them to enhance our trade skills in order to get ahead of our classmates. We all need to have our trade skill core at Apprentice 2 to finish the year, and it will only take a few trips out of town to get there this week while the others struggle through the early stages with actual study and practice. The boy next to her nodded. My chosen trade skill is Inscriptionist, and you can't start doing anything useful until Apprentice level 3, so I really need to get a head start on upgrading my skill core, or I'll be stuck doing the basics for a year when my tutors taught me all of that ages ago. In the ancient times, it was said that the Assembly of Grand Wizards had cast a spell over the world, the Monster Blessing, that rewarded those who killed the creatures which plagued the land with treasures. They were formed from the accumulated mana in the monsters' bodies, condensed at the moment of their death. The reward could take the form of nearly anything, but for the most part, what you got was a monster core, a simple ball of condensed mana that could be used to upgrade skill and enhancement gems. Dominic heard the cobblestones under the wheels turn to dirt or some softer surface as they passed through the gates, and everyone began to gather their weapons. The driver opened the small window between the cab and the canvas-covered rear area and looked back at them. 2 minutes until we reach the drop-off point. Best to get your gear ready now, sirs and misses. It was obvious that most of them had only ever trained with a noble sparring instructor. They had no scars on their hands or arms, no hardened muscles, and the excitement that they had built up was making their hands shake nearly as much as Dominic's had been before he got into the blacksmith's gift bag full of soft but slightly stale pretzels. You look like you've done this before, but your spell gem is still level 1. Did you perhaps train somewhere before your ability to attune matured? One of the boys asked Dominic as they got ready to disembark. He nodded carefully and made up an excuse for having never upgraded his only spell. I was training to be a guard before I came to the city. That wasn't precisely true. He had wandered the mountains after he lost his parents and his home, looking for anyone who had survived and later anyone who would take him in. Although he could attune magical gems from birth, Dominic had only recently obtained the Minor Illusions spell gem while rummaging through a Magitech scrapyard here in the city. And by then, every mana core from the beasts he had slain in the past had been pawned for food or shelter. He had nearly gotten himself shot by the security guard for his theft, but it was worth it. The girl in enchanted chain mail gave a fist pump in excitement. Perfect. A guardsman's son will know a thing or two about how to handle himself in a fight, not like you losers. She taunted. Just wait and see. We're going to destroy those filthy green beasts. Darlise laughed. Somehow, that didn't assure Dominic at all. In fact, he was already regretting getting into this carriage almost as much as he was regretting going into the city, and they hadn't even made it to the location in the forest where these students expected the goblins to be found. "We're here. Everyone out, and be on your guard. The goblins like to ambush as soon as the vehicle is out of sight," the driver reminded them, looking as concerned as Dominic was feeling. "Thank you, Jeeves. We will see you this evening back at the academy. Walking back to the city is an important rite for a first hunt." Darlise replied proudly. Yep, they were definitely idiots. Chapter 3. Like herding cats. All of the students rushed out as soon as the carriage stopped, waving their weapons around like idiots, while Dominic and the girl in the chain mail went last, neither of them with their weapons out. "Just stay close to me, so those idiots don't smack you accidentally. My dad is a guard as well." "Well, a guard officer. The younger son of a viscount and holder of a baron's peerage himself." The younger girl whispered. "Don't worry, I've got your back." Dominic whispered back, with a conspiratorial wink. The thought that a girl half his size and years his junior was going to protect him was rather amusing. But she seemed quite confident in herself. The girl might be a Signia noble, but she seemed to have more common sense than the rest of these kids put together, and Dominic was beginning to wonder if this trip was officially sanctioned by anyone in charge of the academy. If it was, then surely there should have been at least one proper guard with them. The majority of the students began to run off into the woods, spreading out and not keeping in any sort of formation as soon as the carriage was gone, and Dominic's fears were confirmed. This was just a field trip to them, and they didn't take the goblins seriously at all. Dominic had spent years in the mountains, often foraging for food when villages had simply run him off for being dragonkin. He was no stranger to the dangers of monsters in the wilderness, and he had spent years learning the best way to hide from danger. Only a handful were moving together with him and the guard's daughter, and keeping a proper watch for threats. "Eyes to the right. I hear something moving," one of the men in their small group announced. How he could be sure of that was anyone's guess, but the rest of the students were making so much noise that it would be impossible for the goblins not to have heard them if they were even remotely close to this location. The crashing was audible to Dominic only a few seconds later as an injured student ran past them with two goblins chasing close behind. His armor was damaged, and there were signs of blood on his face. Red human blood, not goblin blood. "Stand and fight, man. You're a warrior. Where is your sword?" the guardsman's daughter shouted, moving in between him and the goblins while Dominic prepared his arcane blast spell. A moment's focus sent a blast of energy that felt a lot like nature magic, with a hint of ancient power flying out from his hands, taking the lead goblin off its feet and leaving the creature nearly dead. The ranger next to him, who was wearing a light leather vest over his school uniform, let loose an arrow into the unfortunate creature, ending its life, while the second one charged around their attempt to block and continued to chase the fleeing warrior. "You idiot, get back here. We can't protect you from that far away," the ranger shouted, but the boy kept screaming and running, slowly losing ground on the goblin, who was not showing any signs of fatigue. Dominic focused again and unleashed another arcane blast into the creature's back, flaying the skin apart and dropping it dead on the ground. Still, the boy didn't stop, and he kept running down the road until he was out of sight. The sight had disheartened a number of the students who hadn't really considered that they might get injured, and Dominic noticed that they were beginning to slip away into the forest in the direction of the city. They had left town with 20 people, which seemed like enough at first, but now that they were here, only 6 were useful at all, and the others were either running away or wandering solo through the woods, shouting and laughing, not realizing that they were in danger. "Can you get them back here? All that shouting is going to bring goblin patrols down on them, and we don't even know where they are," Dominic asked the small group that was with him. "No. Darlise is a duke's son, and he's the only one the rest of the group will listen to. We're all the children of lesser nobles and knights. He did us all a favor to get permission to leave the academy grounds in the first place. They're not going to listen to anything we say," the ranger boy informed Dominic with a rueful sigh. One of the girls snickered at that, and the boy amended his comment. "Correction, we're almost all children of lower nobles. But nobody ever listens to anything that Eleanor says anyhow, despite her being a lesser princess." Eleanor was a silent figure at the front of their group, as well as one of the student group's two paladins, armed with shining plate armor and a sturdy shield paired with a brutal flanged mace. But the boy was right. She was just kind of there, and nobody was asking her to do anything or acknowledging her presence. In fact, with her visor down, Dominic hadn't even realized she was female, much less a princess. He just thought she was another young teen boy. Eleanor, would you like to take the front line with our other brave warrior? You can stop them from getting to the two ranged members, and then... Dominic paused to see what the magical gems mounted into the clothing of the other two were. And then our scribes can throw rocks at them or something. He finished. The two boys who had gotten the scribe trade skill cores looked back at him in embarrassment. The pair had no magical combat skills, but they did have magical blades and some combat training as the children of nobles. Eleanor smiled back at Dominic and nodded, then moved up to the front of the group. It was a good thing that the goblins were all under 20 kilos, or Dominic would have felt awful about asking the princess to lead the party, even if she was a fully armored paladin. They continued on as a group until they heard more screaming, and then an abrupt halt to the screech, which was replaced by a soft gurgling noise. Straight ahead, it might not be too late if we can get Princess Eleanor there, Dominic commanded. The group moved up and saw 3 students, 1 boy and 2 girls on the ground. The boy had his throat slit, while the girls were cowering in terror as the goblins taunted them and slowly moved to encircle them. Eleanor cast her only healing spell on the dying boy as soon as she got in range, and then settled into a fighting stance as the goblins realized that someone was interfering with their fun. Dominic fired off another of his arcane blasts, and the ranger let loose an arrow, each taking down a goblin while the other monsters rushed their frontline defenders. A second arcane blast dropped a goblin, and the 2 scribes ran forward with battle cries to support the girls in front. There's their courage. I knew it was the right call to stay close to the 2 cutest girls in class. The ranger laughed as he continued to fire, pulling arrows out of a leather quiver hung across his back. So that was the reason the boys were so energetic about fighting, despite not pursuing combat-capable trades. They wanted the attention of the girls from their class. Well, they had it now, and the guardsman's daughter even looked a little impressed with them, while Princess Eleanor had the same neutral stance as she had from the moment that they had engaged the goblins. Calm, assured, and experienced. None of which were words that Dominic would normally associate with anyone her age. Chapter 4: Rescue the Children. A particularly agile goblin tossed a crude spear at Dominic, which scraped across the top of his hand and left a deep gouge that burned with whatever toxic filth was on the blade. His next arcane blast tore the creature apart, and the wound quickly began to close, pushing the filth back out of the wound as it did. Now that's some enhancement core that you've got, sorcerer. Being able to use a healing on kill type item must mean that your ancestor was a brutal sort of creature, though. The ranger commented, clearly impressed by the magic. A dragon of balance, actually. Life for life. Dominic explained. That was the way of the world dragon that his lineage was supposed to have come from. Nothing was for free, and even the greatest of gifts often seemed to come with a caveat. For most of his life, Dominic had considered them to be the whims of a bored magical beast, putting conditions on its help for personal amusement, but later, the clerics had explained to him that it was the way of balance. Too much of a good thing would breed arrogance, so the world dragon tempered its gifts to its mixed-blood descendants with a cost. He still suspected that was utter nonsense and that his theory about a bored dragon was the correct one, but he never dared to speak up against the clerics, especially after his parents both fell ill when he was 5, and the clerics were the only ones who could help at all to ease their pain. A foreign sense of amusement entered the back of his mind, and Dominic nearly missed with his next spell. He had never heard of a dragon interacting with any of its descendants before, much less directly intervening in their lives without a request or a dragon-scale talisman, but as a royal descendant of the mighty world dragon, it wasn't completely unreasonable to think that the creature had taken an interest in him. Perhaps his notion that the world dragon was simply bored and watching its descendants from afar wasn't so far-fetched after all. The 2 warriors were holding the goblins in place, But they were heavily outnumbered now that the other goblins had heard the sounds of battle, and the 3 students they had come to rescue were no help at all. "Get up and fight if you don't want to be desecrated and killed by goblins," the guardsman's daughter shouted at the 2 girls, who were still cowering on the ground in horror. That was the wrong thing to say, as she realized the moment that the girls got to their feet and fled screaming. That was 2 fewer allies for them, and the boy they had rescued was barely stable at the moment. "Does he have a healing potion? Get him to drink it," Dominic instructed the ranger, who was closer to the boy. Alex, you need to drink the healing potion. You're not dead, but you need to drink the healing potion," the ranger pleaded. Slowly, the boy started to focus, then took a small red bottle from his pocket and downed the contents in one shot. Dominic sighed at the waste. That looked like a high-grade potion, and they were only kids without any physical enhancement abilities, much less high-ranked ones that would require that much healing to recover. It would heal him for many times his total health instantly. But on the bright side, he was now up on his feet with his blade back in his hand and ready to fight. "Thank you, Princess. I don't know what I would have done without you," the boy formally declared, complete with an elaborate bow that dropped him down on one knee. He nearly lost his life for his idiotic gesture, and only Dominic's fast reflexes managed to block the goblin's club with a dagger before it made contact with the back of his head. Save the formal announcements for when you're not in combat. Royal Protocol, Section 17, Part 6. Dominic informed him instinctively, reciting a line that he had heard many times before. He had many fond memories of day trips around the village, and the guard training grounds were next to the market, where his parents plied their trade as magical item vendors. For him, it was just common sense not to do stupid formal things in battle, but the group of noble children all looked at him strangely. "How did you know that?" Section 17 is all about the Royal Guard Protocol. Nobody studies that unless they're planning to guard one of the princes or princesses. The freshly recovered boy asked as he attacked the goblin in front of him. Dominic just shrugged and breathed a sigh of relief that the 2 nations' royal guards used the same set of training manuals, and he hadn't quoted some completely erroneous section of the local royal protocol to these students out of instinct. At least his speech seemed to have gotten the boy moving again, and he was no longer an easy target. His trade skill gem, mounted on his necklace, said that he was a rogue, the base skill core for spies, personal bodyguards, and many similar jobs. So he should be decent in combat, even if the gem was an apprentice one at level 1. He had clearly been training, and his actions were quick and agile. If Dominic had to guess, he had tried to be a frontline fighter in the previous battle and had gotten overrun by the goblins who were more interested in getting to the girls behind him. The same girls who had fled and left him behind the first chance that they got. Dominic fired off another arcane blast, and the ranger looked at him in confusion. "How is your mana doing? You can slow down if you need to." Nobody expects a commoner with a level 1 spell gem to be doing constant damage. He reminded Dominic quietly. That was a good question. How was his mana pool doing? The arcane blast didn't use any of his body's stored mana. It just pulled it from around him every time that he activated the spell. That wasn't something that the skill gems could do, though. It was an ability unique to him as a dragonkin, and he didn't want to draw more attention to the fact he was not like them when these noble kids were being so kind. "I think I will be fine. It's a blessing thing," he replied, not sure how to explain to someone else without at least somewhat referring to his lineage. Shot after shot, Dominic fired his arcane blast at the goblins, taking them out with precision that was increasing with every kill. They were a trash mob to the skilled guards in most villages, and in any case, they normally only held value for the mana core that they would grant. Anyone with a trade skill core, a suitable magitech item, or a magical lineage, like the Dragonkin Sorcerer, could extract it, or any other loot granted by the Monster Blessing. The extraction was done by touching the body, and then a mana core would appear in the person's magitech storage item, or a pocket that they focused on during the process. The magitech storage item was preferred, as it would keep the fragile mana core safe until they wanted to use it to barter or to enhance a skill gem. The only time that the physical gem would normally appear in the hands of the extractor was if the Monster Blessing happened to have formed an enhancement or spell gem. Those were much more valuable and could be mounted into clothing or weapons and attuned to the user to gain access to new abilities. If the kill granted an item, it was an entirely different matter. It would appear near the body as a solid object if you didn't have a Magitech storage item. It could only appear somewhere that held a larger volume than its exterior dimensions, so you could be in for a hard time getting your loot home if you didn't bring the right equipment. Dominic had one, inherited from his deceased parents. It wasn't of high quality, but it held great sentimental value to him and currently held all his worldly possessions. Chapter 5. Left Behind. As they fought, the sounds of screaming and combat began to fall further and further behind them. You, Dominus, or whatever your name was. Do you hear what I hear? The ranger asked. That your friends have all run away back to the city with the goblins chasing them? Yes, I hear it. Once they make it to the road, they should be safe. The caravans travel with guards, and they shouldn't have a problem with a few goblins. Dominic agreed. Where does that leave us? The rogue asked. Killing goblins for fun and profit until mid-afternoon, then we can go back to town before it gets dark. Princess Eleanor the Paladin explained. The two scribes didn't seem all that enthusiastic about staying out here that long, and Alex the Rogue was more than a little paranoid after his close brush with death. The number of goblins they were in combat with was increasing by the minute, and now each of their frontline warriors had 3 of them to deal with while Dominic and the ranger fired at the ones who were just coming into view. I'm low on arrows. We need to move so I can recover some more of them. The ranger noted. Alex, can you dart out and grab us some arrows? I will take your place at the front while you run. Dominic suggested. The rogue didn't look happy, but the young man gritted his teeth and rushed out to grab a half-dozen arrows from the closest of the goblins. Here you go, make them count. He informed his classmate, then ducked under the female warrior's blade to stab a goblin in the heart. I had more arrows, but they were with one of the other students, a big barbarian clan warrior, who can carry way more than I can. He should have rejoined us by now. The ranger informed them. Could he have run back to the city? The princess asked while wiping goblin blood from the handle of her mace with a filthy rag during a short lull in the fighting. It's possible, but he didn't seem like the sort. The ranger sighed, his dark brown hair falling over his eyes. The forest was beginning to fall silent as the goblin horde fell under their blades and Dominic's spells, while even the pair of scribes were putting on an excellent show for the princess and the guard's daughter. Despite the fact that they had no magical combat skills at all. Keep moving through the bodies. Collect the arrows where you can. We will need them to get back home. Princess Eleanor instructed the group, falling back on her years of childhood training to command soldiers and run a household as a minor princess. Dominic was learning a lot about how to successfully interact with others in a group from her style. There, I see footprints in the mud, someone large, 6 smaller footsteps, and far too many goblins. There is blood on the ground, but they're moving fairly well as they fight. The ranger explained, pointing at the ground off to one side. They're also headed for the city. I think we're the last ones still out here. The rogue agreed. They followed the tracks for a few meters when they saw the first signs that they were headed the right way. One dead student in arcanist robes, and a large number of dead goblins. They didn't need tracking skills to tell them that the group had gotten surrounded here and had a brutal fight, likely at the same time that their own group was going to rescue the rogue. Crap. He was an earl's son. I don't know how we're going to explain all this to not only the academy, but the students' parents. The way things went down today, it's unlikely that he will be the only one who didn't make it back. One of the scribes muttered. You don't seem all that concerned. Princess Eleanor remarked, looking at Dominic. Well, for one, I am the group's pickup member. I met you all for the first time at the staging lot. It's tragic that the group lost members, but there was nothing we could have done. We saved who we could, and there is no shame in that. Plus, I'm not from the academy. I'm not going to get detention or even a reprimand for this fiasco, and I have no parents for them to contact. Dominic reminded them. Despite his deceptively youthful face, he was older than all of them by about 4 years. How fast you matured depended on your lineage. Most sorcerers would mature much faster than humans, but not dragonkin. Dragons often took a century to reach the stage they would call young adult. So, dragonkin matured and aged much more slowly as well. The princess might have been under the impression that he was younger because he was still using a level 1 spell gem, but for people in his economic situation, it wasn't that uncommon to never have the funds or chance to upgrade more than your trade skill. If the princess were a regular student, studying at a regular academy, the chance to gain levels on her secondary gems would have only come after she graduated. Dominic could only hope that things were the same here, but the way that others had accepted his apparent skill level when they met suggested that a slow advancement as a teenager wasn't unheard of, even for the nobles. Can we at least bring the body back? It's customary for the families to hold a full funeral rite for noble children, one of the scribes suggested. That's an excellent idea. Who wants to cut a pair of long branches? Dominic asked. Why branches? The scribe asked. Eleanor snorted in amusement. Well, you're not going to physically carry Jeff's body, are you? Tie his cloak around 2 long sticks, and you can drag him behind you. Hasn't everyone seen the medics carrying the wounded before? The scribe face-bombed as he realized that he had missed something obvious. Then frowned as he realized he'd just volunteered to be the litter-bearer. But he couldn't ask one of the girls to do it. It would be an insult to his dignity as a nobleman, and the 2 scribes were well aware that they were the worst combatants among the remaining students. He quickly got to work, looking for long branches while the rogue and ranger scanned the area for threats. Hey, good luck, cousin. I found your arrows here next to a damaged bough. No sign of blood, though, so I think that it just took a blade to the bowstring. The rogue whisper shouted from a few dozen meters away. Finally, some good news. There have to be 100 arrows there still. They had barely gotten started when they lost the use of their bowmen. But that means they were down a ranged fighter right from the start, and they might be in trouble if there are a lot of goblins headed their way. We had 2 strong range members, and they were without both the Arcanist's devices and the other ranger. They would have had to fight everything up close unless they had another ranged fighter with them. Did we even have one in the class? I don't think so, but they have the other paladin with them. I can sense the use of healing magic on the body, and we didn't bring a cleric. Eleanor replied, Let's just get out of here. I get the feeling that we aren't alone. The rogue muttered, and Dominic couldn't agree more. Chapter 6, but not forgotten. Once the litter was made, and the young student's body safely secured, they began to make their way back to the city as quickly as possible, given their group size and the extra burden they were carrying. The tracks that they were following weren't headed for the road, which would bring them closer to a chance to be rescued. They were headed straight back for the city walls. It was more direct, but the only real reason to do that was if you were afraid of luring something dangerous to the road. Going through the forest was shorter, but not in any way faster. We are getting closer. The grass here is still working to spring up after being stepped on. I would say that they're no more than 5 minutes ahead of us now. If we shouted, they would probably hear us. The ranger whispered. Dominic sighed. Or if they shouted, we would hear them, which means they're likely not in combat anymore. If they were, we would be able to hear it by now. Can we pick up any more speed? It would be best to catch up with them before anything happens to either group. There is safety in numbers, and of the students who didn't run to the road, there are still 2 separate groups of us. The scribes nodded and shouldered the litter between them, so they could move faster through the woods than dragging it would allow. Eleanor looked around the group to be sure they were all prepared, then gestured forward with her mace. Alex, take the sorcerer and watch our backs. Everyone else, I want at least a jog until we have the others in sight. The young princess ordered. The order did make some sense. They were the 2 most agile out of the group, and the rogue could defend Dominic if anything got close, while he was their only range member who could reliably attack without stopping. Using a bow accurately while on the run took a lot of skill, so the ranger wasn't a good choice for fast-moving combat at this age. But the thought of being the first line of defense against an attack and not having any more armor on than the threadbare outfit that was under his long coat was still unnerving. In the villages, he had always been able to count on having a guard somewhere nearby if he had to venture out of the walls to do errands or day labor on the farms, and they came fully equipped, not in worn leather pants and a tunic that he had salvaged from a charity drive. It was made of durable cotton, but it was not much better than wearing nothing if he got attacked. The pair kept a careful watch for any sign of the goblins as they jogged along behind the group, but there was nothing to be seen other than the trees and their own footsteps turning up the soft dirt of the forest floor. If anything was following them, it wouldn't have a hard time of it, and it would know that they were running, as the footprints were distinct even to Dominic's untrained eye. "I hear battle up ahead," Princess Eleanor shouted, picking up the pace until the pair of scribes carrying the dead mage's body began to fall behind. Dominic did his best not to give any sign of annoyance that a full outrun for these young students was little more than a jog, even for a young man like him. They were getting there as fast as they could, and they had already proven that they were willing to fight for their lives when needed. The sounds of shouting and horse hooves grew louder by the second, until they burst into the open fields around the city walls, where a large training exercise was going on. There were over 100 soldiers and Royal Guard candidates gathered around a half-dozen terrified students and one muscular young barbarian noble with blood all over his leather armor. False alarm, it's the royal training grounds outside the walls. Somehow, we ended up on the other side of the city. The princess sighed. They had been following the tracks of the other group, though, so they should all be here somewhere and hopefully rescued without any further casualties. "Princess, it is good to see you safe. Your classmates told us that an outing to gain experience went horribly wrong, and they weren't sure that any others had survived," a guard captain announced, as he rode over to where they were catching their breath near the treeline. "I believe that most of them escaped with minor injuries at worst, though there might have been other losses that we didn't see. We personally watched most of them run for the road, but we were engaged with a group of goblins while we helped rescue Alex, who had been injured while providing cover for other classmates." Eleanor explained. "Let me guess, the Nala twins? I told you those girls would be the death of you, but I didn't mean for you to take that literally." The captain laughed while their rogue blushed. "All right, let's get this unfortunate one cleaned up, and I will send for his parents. The Royal Guard will deploy another team from here since I have your tracks to follow, and there is a guard detachment headed out from the main gates as well to make sure that all the noble children who managed to wheedle their way out of the academy for the day are safe. I don't recognize this one, though. Who might you be?" The captain was clearly looking at him, so Dominic straightened his back and gave him a polite fist-to-chest salute, suitable for the man's status as a knight. "My name is Dominic, and I am new to the city. I needed a bit of coin, and I was hoping to get it off the goblins, so I went with the students when we met at the staging grounds," he explained. "And here I thought they had the good sense to bring a senior with them on their trip. No offense. It looks like you did all right, though. I don't see any wounds on you, and you aren't showing any signs of mana exhaustion." The captain's look held a fair bit of approval, and Dominic did his best not to give in to the temptation to brag about his skills. A team of royal guards came up and surrounded the princess, separating her from the group, while another team was headed for the treeline, accompanied by a group of dogs and one man in a strange outfit with 4 layers of glowing goggles on his helmet. The fashion here in the city was strange, to say the least, all in dull browns and blacks with a thing for using gears as decorations, but no matter what it looked like to his more flashy sensibilities, they did still have the skills to blend magic with technology to accomplish what they needed to. On the city wall above the training ground, a slender figure in elaborately engraved armor bearing the insignia of the royal family turned away from the scene. Her sister was back safely, and she had many questions that needed answers. Chapter 7, Signia City Bus. "I have arranged a coach to take these ones back to the academy, and the princess will be headed home. Do you need a ride anywhere, young man? I can call you a cab," the captain offered. Dominic wasn't sure how much a cab would cost to get across town again, but he really couldn't spare anything right now. According to his storage cube, the Magitech item inherited from his parents, which exploited the laws of space and nature to collect items from dead monsters and store much more than should be possible, he had 24 copper coins to his name, all of which were gained from the goblins, and that needed to get him some food and a place to sleep after he traded the copper daggers that the goblins dropped into his storage to the blacksmith. If he had been thinking, he should have checked the Arcanist's body to see if his companions had looted his corpse. He might have had something good on him when he died. He was rich, his family wouldn't miss a few little things. Not all of the goblins gave him a copper dagger, some dropped broken spears, and one had given his a piece of tanned leather, but it was enough to fill the smith's order. With a final wave to the guard captain, Dominic headed back into town and started walking. The air in the industrial area of the city was unpleasant, to say the least, and he wished he had a bit of cloth to make a proper mask. But after only a few blocks, he saw a transit stand with an odd bus waiting at it. The vehicle had some sort of external piston drive, like a steam locomotive, but it was powered directly by magical crystals, with a mage at the helm. The crude drawing on the stop said that it went all the way across town for a copper coin, so Dominic hopped up into the exposed rear seating area and dropped his money in the jar. "We will be off in 1 minute, sir. Schedules to keep and all." The driver informed his with a smile, then returned to watching the clock on the dashboard. The device gave a distinct ring, and the driver slammed the controls forward, violently throwing the large vehicle into motion and totally ignoring the people running toward it. 2 of them grabbed the handrails and hopped on, while the others stopped chasing and walked back to the station to catch the next one, a sight that made Dominic wonder if this was a normal situation for the bus. By the driver's attitude, he suspected that the schedule was more important to him than if anyone was even on the bus at all. The first rider hopped off a few blocks later, not at a stop. He just picked a spot when they were close to the shoulder and hopped off. That was the same way that the next 2 passengers got on as well, with one not bothering to come up and pay, just hanging off the rear bumper until his stop came a few blocks later. The driver didn't mind. He just kept up his pace, and the passengers got on and off at their leisure, waiting for safe moments in the slow-moving afternoon traffic to jump down to the sidewalk. "Thanks for the ride," Dominic called as he hopped over the side in front of the blacksmith, while the driver laughed. "The stop's in 1 more block if you need to catch another ride." He called back as the transport rounded the corner to the meeting area for departing groups and slid to a stop with the brakes locked up. It was probably safer to get off early. "Master Smith? Pops, are you in?" Dominic called over the clanging of a hammer on an anvil coming from the back room. "Come on back. Did you get the copper that I need?" The stout dwarven blacksmith called out from the back of the smithy shop. "Indeed I did. It was a bit of a mess since I didn't pick the best group to go goblin hunting with, but I still managed to get the job done somehow." He agreed, then took out the stack of filthy copper daggers from his storage cube and placed them in a bin by the smith's workstation. Pops looked over the pile of filthy weapons and nodded happily. "That will melt down to more than enough. I hope that you haven't used the cores you got yet. You'll need them to start learning blacksmithing." Dominic wasn't sure how many he had gotten, but he checked the items in his inventory cube, scanning past the trash, items under repair, and broken Magitech weapons. 18 level 1 cores. He replied with a smile. As he remembered it, a level 1 mana core granted up to 10 points toward a chosen gem, core, or Magitech item. The points weren't really a measured thing, but a convention used to measure how much progress it would cause at various enhancement levels without all the complicated math. That would be spells, combat skills, and trade skills. It was quite the boon, much more valuable to him than anything else he had gained today. They were also tradable items, unlike the spell gems, which were only tradable before they were upgraded. But they were also consumables and in very limited quantities, so the market value of mana cores was quite high. He needed 300 points to take a skill from level 1 to level 2, according to the classroom lessons on spell gems and Magitech items his mother had insisted on teaching when he was young. 18 goblin kills of your own? I would say that was a pretty impressive day for you, lad. I can't imagine that the students would have traded you theirs. Those cores are quite costly on the open market. Pops mumbled as he washed the copper daggers in a sink full of something that bubbled and hissed when the weapons entered. The acid bath is the best way to get rid of goblin filth. Now we're ready to start slagging them down. Watch close, lad. It will help your smithing skills. Dominic laughed. I don't have any smithing skills yet, remember? Right, the trade skill core and the training book. Here you go. Use that and then watch me work. Dominic wasn't quite sure what the smith meant by use, but when he held the core in one hand and the book in the other, a notification appeared on the cover. Attuned to trade skill of smithing. Created by Master Dwarven Smith Pops, will improve the user's skill to Apprentice Smith, level 1. Then a string of tiny words appeared on the trade skill core's polished gemstone surface. Skill gained smithing, Apprentice 1. He finally had a trade skill. Ironically, he didn't yet have the big muscular body to actually suit the smith's trade, but after watching the old man use magic to heat the forge and melt the ingots, Dominic thought that perhaps he might still enjoy this trade just fine. He would be much larger than average eventually, but dragonkin age slowly and were often mistaken for elves in their younger adult years. If you didn't see their horns, that was. Now that the gem was attuned to him, it would never attune to anyone else, so it was worthless to thieves and could be openly worn to show off your status, assuming that you had a properly sized socket in your clothing or accessories. For the moment, Dominic tossed it into his shirt pocket. The attuned gem wouldn't grant his any benefit from inside his storage cube, and trapped against his chest was good enough for the small sphere to be usable. Chapter 8. To make a magic item. Pops, as the smith preferred to refer to himself, stood by the forge with the cleaned copper daggers in a thick crucible made of a stone that wasn't familiar to Dominic. The trade skill gem had called him a dwarven smith, but he was clearly not a dwarf, or at least not entirely a dwarf, as he stood only a few centimeters shorter than Dominic did. Watch closely, boy. What you need to do is fire up the forge, either with magic or with coal, and then pump air through. It's the combination of burning and airflow that gets it properly hot, he explained as he began to work. Now magic does the job better than coal, so the copper will be ready in just a minute. If you have to use a conventional forge, it could take a half hour or more. We're going to have to make it molten today, since I need to make a special blend of naval brass to complete this compass that the customer wanted. I've got the zinc and tin. I just needed more copper. It's become difficult to come by here on the lower side of town, since the resellers in the noble district pay better. Forget I said that part. I don't mind if you keep bringing more copper directly to me. Most of the clothing makers use it for making bronze and brass ornamentation, and it's on most of the magical items that are made by the wizards, so there is no shortage of demand for copper in the city. They even use it in all of the steam vessels, though that's making them increasingly expensive to build and maintain these days. Now, the copper is already liquid, so we add a third as much molten zinc and a tiny splash of melted tin, and there we go. Give it a nice stir and a hit of mana to blend the alloy, then pour it into the mold. Then we dunk it in the water and let it cool for a few minutes before working with it. Dominic looked around as he waited for the metal to cool. He had somewhat expected there to be weapons or fancy armor of some sort, given the smith's age and personality, but it looked like it was almost all common tools and small useful metal items. There were sewing needles, nails, hand tools, some sturdy-looking metal dishware that would be good over a fire, thick cast iron pots and pans. All were very well made, but none of them were fancy, and Pops had said that they were making a compass today, which was usually a very ornate item, more of a decorative accessory if it wasn't going to be hard-mounted to a ship's bridge. The bell rang, signaling that someone had entered the store, and Pops waved his hand in that general direction. Go take care of that, would you? I need to watch the metal. The prices are on everything, no discounts. There was an odd man wearing a long leather coat over black enameled plate armor with the same style of bronze gears as ornamentation that Dominic's own coat was adorned with. He had a matching leather top hat with round, purple-lensed glasses over his eyes, but a friendly smile for Dominic when he came out to help him. The old man has a new helper, does he? I need a grappling hook. The target we're looking for is at the top of a cliff. The man explained in a slow, drawling accent. He leaned forward to smile at Dominic, and he noticed that the man had a pistol on either hip and a pair of short swords inside his long coat. An odd combination, but everything about the city was new to him, and common sense appeared to have very little to do with their decision-making processes. I see one over here. 2 silver pieces each. How many do you need for your group? I'd recommend at least having a spare in case one of your ropes breaks on the way up. The tall man stood with a hand on one hip, as if examining the quality of the hook, which appeared to be made of entwined pieces of stainless steel or a similarly shiny metal, which were forged into one piece for the eyelet. It's so bright. It will give us away instantly. Don't you have one in bronze? It's much more fashionable, he asked. The old dwarf had said he was out of copper, but Dominic knew that they could dull the hook without any real issues. The soldiers he grew up around did it all the time for blades to be used during evening guard rotations. I could darken the hooks to match your armor. Perhaps give them a bit of pinstriping for a small upcharge," he suggested with a wink. "Darkened will have to do. I've got to meet my group in 10 minutes, and we forgot to buy one in advance." He sighed, clearly upset that he couldn't get a fashionable bronze accessory. "I will be right back." Pops was silently laughing as Dominic walked in with the 2 grappling hooks, but he had the forge ready and a bucket of oil for quenching hot metal. The oil would give it a durable black finish, and Pop's magic cooled the hooks to room temperature in seconds. "There you go. Only 6 silver coins in total for your custom grappling hooks," Dominic informed the fashionable man with his best smile. "Of course, these are perfect. I'm sure the others will agree. I will see you again, lovely young dragonkin." The man flounced out of the shop, and Pops finally let out the laughter he was holding in. "You're a good one, boy." Got 2 extra silvers out of him to blacken them. "I usually do that for free if they don't like the shiny bits." He commended Dominic. "The grappling hooks aren't all that expensive, though, are they? Everything in here looks to be quite reasonably priced, and there aren't any weapons or other high-priced items." Dominic noted. In fact, the hooks were one of the more expensive items compared to the housewares. Only the specialty tools cost more. Nobody makes it this far across town without a weapon. We're too near to the staging area for the coaches heading out to the battlegrounds and wilderness regions. No, what they need are the last-minute essentials, things they forgot to pack, not the things that they carry with them everywhere. So, that's what I sell. 100 small transactions instead of one big one," Pops explained. "Now, watch as I flatten this out and start the engraving. That's where the smithing skill comes into play, and I'll show you a trick that only a few know." Chapter 9. A Unique Compass. Pops had the copper laid out in a dozen small ingots, and Dominic wondered just how large this compass was supposed to be. It should just be a box with a carrier liquid and a floating dial under a glass dome. But he didn't see any glass in the shop at all. What we are going to make today is a dimensional compass, not a ship's compass. It will tell you what plane you've gone to and what direction you need to take to get to the one you want. It's a bit of a specialty item and not many know how to make it, so my customer has been a bit cranky. His sort doesn't often come out to the common quarters to get anything, much less in person. Once he was finished ranting, Pops snorted with derision, making his long white beard fluff up for a moment. Dominic smiled at his version of a pouting face and instinctively knew that it must be for his benefit. He couldn't see that old man being that emotional about some odd mage. You don't need to know how to make the whole thing, and you would not be able to make it at your skill level anyhow. But what I want you to remember is this. See how you need to lay all the magical materials perfectly on it in the exact pattern? If you get any bit of that wrong, the item is scrap metal and you'll lose most of the materials. But if you do like this, make a paper cutout that you stick to the copper sheet. You can just paint that crystal paste over the top in the right brush stroke order and call it a day. As long as you don't try to add any extra mana before you touch up all the edges, it's fine. The old man was practically rolling with laughter as he did just what he said, using the template to paint the symbols on the copper sheets until they glowed with magic and the runes engraved themselves into the surface. Now we take our hammer and our chisels and get to work. No hard edges. I use this one here to round them off, then the flat one to make a nice hard bend. Light taps with the hammer. The hot brass is pretty soft. The pieces all interlock like this, all 70 of them, until we end up with this. He had an ornately decorated cube in his hand, slid together with such precision that there were no visible seams. Then he put a bit of magical power into it, and the freshly crafted dimensional compass glowed. A word to the wise. Dimensional mages and demi-humans don't mix well. It's best to stay out of his way, and if he's fool enough to suggest you follow him on a trip, politely decline. If you leave your home world, there is no guarantee that you will end up anywhere but where your ancestors live, you see. If you signed a pact with or descended from an infernal being, you would send your entire party straight to hell, and you'd be the last one to die. Pops cautioned his. It's a dragon. A world dragon. Dominic mumbled, unsure what the reaction to the revelation about his obscure and powerful ancestor species would be. Pops chuckled. I'm not sure the others would appreciate the distinction between being eaten by demons and dragons, young sorcerer. Just because he is related to you doesn't mean he will be happy to see a bunch of strangers showing up on his doorstep. I understand. I suppose that I should probably look for a place to stay the night, now that your lesson is over. I didn't get a chance with all that happened today. Dominic sighed, regretting being so broke. If you got one more of those daggers, or 3 copper a night, I've got a room upstairs that you can stay in. I'll even pay you if you want to sweet-talk the customers for me during the day. Pops suggested with a wiggle of his bushy eyebrows. I've got a few more of the daggers on me. I'll trade you one for the night, and then we can talk about an ongoing arrangement in the morning.
I will warn you, though.
I do intend to apply for the royal apprenticeships during the next intake. Dominic agreed, then set the dagger on the workbench by the anvil. Perfect. You'll need to work hard to gain some skills if you're going to succeed. Now come over here, and I will show you a bit more about the fine points of smithing. We're nearly out of the etching chisels that the scribes and arcanist sorts use to make their runes, and the decorative bits and bobs they like so much. They're not too hard, and I've got a template for the metal.
Pops began.
He already had a number of chisel blanks formed out of iron. They just needed to be worked into the final chisel shapes and given an edge and a handle. You might think that chisels are a waste of time, but they're the easiest edges to do. Do you know where most apprentice smiths at the academies make their tuition fees? They sharpen swords and tools and repair equipment for their team members and classmates. That ability to fix things is the true value of a smith to an adventuring group or an army, not in making new items all the time, but in keeping the good ones they've got in top shape. Once you gain a few levels and start grouping with the sorts who can afford magitech weapons, you will understand that a lot of their money goes to just keeping up their gear. If you can do that for them, they will want to keep you around, even if you don't fight much. Dominic smirked at him. I might not look like much, but I'm no pushover in a battle. But he was also excellent at maintaining and repairing magitech items. He had been salvaging them from the scrapyards to fix and sell ever since his parents had been killed during the invasion of his homeland, over a decade ago. Pops laughed and shook his head. You're not following me. What I'm saying is, why do all the fighting and the fixing when you could do the fixing, and only fight when you felt like it? The kids who want to be adventurers don't learn a working trade. They pick a base skill core that gives them an advantage in combat. They learn their fighting style, and they go to battle and risk their lives. But a smart young smith can have them do the fighting while he does all the side jobs and gets the real experience. I get it. Make the tools, fix the weapons, then find some suckers to go out and use them to get what I need. Only then I will be the one smelting the copper, not the one chasing after a bunch of noblemen's children who fled at the first sight of goblins. Now you're getting it. So, let's show you the first step. How to make the tools. Chapter 10. Apprentice Blacksmith. They worked late into the evening that night, making an assortment of chisels, hand tools, and kitchenware that sold well at the shop. By the time they were done, Dominic had made most of the essentials for a camping trip, and he was actually getting some decent experience on the first level of his chosen craft. Apprentice Smithing, Level 1, 190 points. He was over halfway to the second level of smithing, but Dominic was beginning to realize just how basic the trade skill gem he had traded for was. It taught him the very minimum of the basics when he attuned to it. So little that one night in the forge with a competent smith had nearly doubled his knowledge base. There would be a whole journeyman smith's worth of knowledge locked away in the skill core, but at the start, you couldn't access any of it. The room that Pops led him to was a simple place, with only a bed and a small table. The bathroom was down the hall, presumably shared with Pops and whoever else was living above the shop in the small dorm rooms. But at least it had a latch on the door and a thick window that didn't leak. The constant burning of coal for the steam vehicles made the air terrible outside, but inside the bedroom, it seemed to be filtered somehow and much cleaner than it had been either outside or in the forge. The answer lay in a simple device hidden on the far side of the bed, a fan with a filter mounted to the front of it. The filter had clearly caught a lot of filth on the back, but the fan was blowing clean air around the limited space with a gentle breeze, making it much more pleasant in the bedroom. It was a magical device and presumably ran on mana, but Dominic had no idea if he could even recharge it. He could use spells, but this was dwarven magic, not human or dragon, so it was possible that he wouldn't be able to recharge the device and would have to ask for assistance when it stopped blowing, assuming he was here that long. But if one day out hunting goblins was enough for a 2-week stay, then he just needed another day to get enough for the week's food. Or he could work the shop and find out what Pops was going to pay him as an apprentice. That might be enough all by itself. The thought of food made his stomach growl, but it was now late at night, and he wasn't going to wander the streets after dark looking for somewhere to eat. He would do that in the morning. Morning that came much too soon, with the shops opening at sunrise and the sound of steam-driven cargo carriages whistling and bouncing down the road with their terrible suspension, waking him from a deep sleep. Dominic wanted to go back to bed, but hunger wasn't going to let him, so he reluctantly got dressed and went to the single bathroom on this floor to freshen up. There were fresh towels and a selection of unused soaps in the shower, all of which smelled of various liquors. Dominic shook his head at Pop's version of scented body products, then chose one that smelled of peppermint schnapps. It had a definite alcoholic note to it, but the peppermint wasn't bad. He made his way downstairs to the smithy, intending to head out to find some food, when the scent of roasting meat reached his nose. Pops had 2 plates out on the workbench and a pot of something boiling over the forge. "Take a seat. Breakfast will be just a few more minutes," he instructed. While he talked, Pops dropped a large amount of butter and a mug full of a yellow slurry that Dominic hoped was beaten eggs into a cast-iron skillet, then stirred the pot. "Smithing is hungry work, so we eat heavy in the morning and again at lunch, then snack in the evening or just drink ourselves to sleep," he laughed. The pot turned out to be a thick beef stew, served with scrambled eggs and fresh bread. "That bread comes from 2 doors down, by the way. If you need more, just head over there and tell the old woman not to cheat my apprentice," Pops instructed. "Will that get me a discount? Or will it double the price?" Dominic asked in his best serious tone, but the aging blacksmith just laughed at him. "With that old woman? Who knows? She likes kids, though, and you're a good 2 centuries younger than she is." 2 centuries? Dominic asked in shock. He had assumed the old woman would be human. That's most people's response, and she will deny it. But she's been an old woman for as long as I've lived here, and I was born in this forge. Pops laughed, making his freshly braided beard dance with the movement of his head. The first customers of the day came in as Dominic was washing his bowl, a group of 5 teenagers in practical leather armor and carrying ornate rifles. No, that wasn't quite right. One of them was in cloth robes and carrying a staff, not a rifle. That must be the group's cleric or spellcaster. "What can I help you with this morning?" Dominic asked politely. "We have need of a very particular sort of tools. I need a 5mm engraving chisel suitable for wood, a fine point auger no more than 1mm thick, and a silver engraving pen." The leader of the group explained. "Well, I know we have the chisel and the auger. Those are here, and here, let me see if we've got a silver engraving pen in stock." Dominic replied. The first 2 were tools that they had made last night, but they hadn't worked with any valuable metals. "In the storeroom, 3rd shelf, 7th box." Pops called up from the forge. How he heard anything over the noise was anyone's guess, but the tools were right where he said they would be. "And here is your silver engraving pen. That one's a bit more expensive than the standard tools. Your total will be 24 silver coins," he explained. "Can't you cut us a bit of a deal?" the leader asked, while aiming a conspiratorial and entirely too friendly smile at Dominic. That was going to get old fast. If someone was going to treat him like a gullible kid, why couldn't it be some cute guardswoman or a barmaid? He might just let them get away with it. Maybe he should stop shaving and let a beard begin to grow in. No, he hated the scratchy feeling, even if it did make him look closer to his age in human years. "For a fine and upstanding gentleman like you, 22 silver and 20 copper. Dominic agreed, and saw him begin to celebrate before realizing that the price hadn't actually changed.
"He's got your number, Nick."
"Don't worry, we know how Pops is. The price is the price. Hey, old man, come say hi." The spellcaster called out. "I can say hello just as well from back here. Bother my new apprentice, I'm busy." The adventurers laughed and shook their heads, used to his antics. "We will see you later. Don't work the boy too hard, you hear?" Pops chuckled at the interaction as he watched from the forge. Young Dominic hadn't realized that the innate magical charisma of dragon blood didn't discriminate, and all humans would find themselves drawn to a smiling dragonkin, like they would be drawn to a puppy. The door didn't even have time to close before another customer walked in, looking hurried and somewhat panicked. "Are you the one named Dominic? Princess Alexis requests your presence to accompany herself and Princess Eleanor on her hunting group for the day," the man asked the moment that he stepped foot inside the small shop. Well, that was certainly unexpected. But Dominic would have rather not gone out again with the children from the academy, even if the youngest princess was the most competent among them.